Well, good afternoon. I suppose it's Tuesday, and we have someone that we've had before. Mike Novotny is back. Mike, welcome.
Hey, Beth, good to see you again.
Mike is a pastor and an author. He's a doctor. He's got all the titles. But the best one is he reaches millions of people every week through Time of Grace, the ministry that he has with a great team of people. And you have a new book out. So tell us about not loneliness, but lonely less.
Yeah. Did you know, Beth, that the U.S. Surgeon General recently declared loneliness an epidemic in America?
I did know that. I can't believe it.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. And there's a lot of us who can relate that we would just love to have better relationships in all kinds of areas of our life. We wish we were closer with our siblings. We wish we had more time to get together with friends. Maybe some of us go to church, but we kind of go in and sit and maybe make small talk, maybe not, and then leave and get back in our car and think, okay, I guess that's church. Some people don't
Mm,
feel close to God. Some people have strained marriages, and you add kind of all that stuff up. And even though we're surrounded by so many people and digitally connected to countless people, I think there's a lot of people out there who can say amen to the Surgeon General. I wish my relationships were better. So this
yeah.
book is all about how to fix that.
So I think you went back and talked about the pandemic and how obviously coming out of that, people felt isolated, people felt alone. And
Mhm.
so you would assume that we would correct that, but we've held on to some bad habits. And I think you've pointed some of those out, right? Some things that have just kind of lingered along with us that are a result of habits that we formed perhaps during the pandemic.
Yeah, I think so. Loneliness is a pretty complex topic. There's just
It
some
is.
things that in a broken world, as much as we wish we could avoid them, we can't.
Yeah.
So if you have a
Yeah.
disability and you're stuck at home, there's no quick fix,
Right.
obviously. And if you've
Yeah.
lost your spouse, or you're excited for a baby and there was a miscarriage.
Yeah.
So I definitely don't want to imply like, hey, there's a simple path, so you'll never be lonely again.
Yeah.
That's not how the world works. But to your
Right.
point, I do think during the pandemic, we came up with a bunch of really ingenious ways to stay connected to work or to church or to family or to friends. But my fear is that they were actually so convenient and so easy that we held on to them as long-term habits, and it's really kind of adding up to something substantial relationally.
Yeah.
As a pastor, here's a personal example. I love the fact that we have a live stream. I love the fact that when I'm on vacation, I can kind of stay connected to my church family and, hear the message and hear the announcements and hear the readings and hear the confessions and the prayers. But I would also say that if your regular habit becomes watching the church live stream by yourself in your pajama pants on a Sunday morning,
Hmm.
that after a year of that, it's not a shocker. You're probably not going to have great relationships with your brothers and sisters in Jesus.
Yeah. That's so true.
Yeah.
That's so true. And so I think one of the things we think about when we think of lonely is alone. You think, well, if I'm by myself and I live by myself and I work, you're going to assume some loneliness. But this kind of loneliness that you're talking about can be just as crippling as when you're surrounded by people, but yet you still feel lonely and invisible, right?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I think being alone can be a blessing.
Yeah.
Um, my wife, especially, she's more of an introvert. She just needs that time is good for her. She's not thinking, "Oh, poor me, I'm alone." She's thinking, "Yes, I get to recharge my batteries."
Yeah.
No, I kind of define loneliness as when you wish you had more people in your life. So
Yeah.
it's either when you're alone and you wish you weren't, or you're surrounded by people, but it's just not the kind of connection that you're hoping for.
Yeah.
So I think
Yeah.
that's a good distinction that we should make from the start.
Yeah. And one of the points that you make is adults, as a coach, a lot of times, I'll hear from someone, they want to have a spouse, they want to have a best friend. And my response to them is, okay, what are you going to do different? Because those people aren't going to come knocking on your door.
Hmm.
So, what are the things that you think trip people up or hold them back from being able to make those connections that turn into friendship that result in lonely less?
So I'm kind of nervous, Beth, about what I'm about to say. We might lose a few viewers and listeners and subscribers, but is that okay if I just say it?
Yes, it is.
I, so I was thinking the other day about the kind of, maybe I shouldn't admit this in public, as a pastor, we have lots of people that walk through the doors, and some of them, when they walk through the doors, my heart's initial reaction is yes. Oh, I can't wait to talk to that person. And and sometimes there are people that walk through the doors and I have to say, please, Jesus, help me to be a good
Yeah.
Christian today.
Mm-hmm.
So I was thinking about that. Like, why is it that some people, even if we share faith, even if you're part of my family, even if you go to my school or whatever, why is it that I like talking to some people and I have to like talk myself into talking to other people?
Mm.
And I came up with this little recipe that has been really helpful for me to think about, is that if you want to be the kind of person that has better relationships in every area of your life, you have to remember what makes a good conversation are four things: me, you, good, and bad. And by that I mean, I have to talk. If I'm kind
Yeah.
of like, if I don't engage and sit in the corner, eventually a person's going to say, it was like pulling teeth trying to talk to Mike. Like,
Yeah.
I have to be willing to open up. That's
Mm-hmm.
me. Then there's you. I also know a lot of people, and my temptation is to be one of these people that talks and talks and talks. And Beth, you won't believe what happened to me. Oh, and then another thing happened to me, and another thing happened to me, and eventually, like, oh, you're it's like the
Yeah.
fire hose of words, and you're thinking, like, I need a break from this guy.
Yeah.
So the Bible says we have to be quick to listen and slow to speak. So there's me and you, and then really quickly, good and bad is that if I'm just, I have this problem and I have this problem and I'm struggling with this and this is like, you can only endure so much of my emotional weight on your shoulders until you just like, it's like he dumps on me every time he opens his mouth. So I have to talk about good things. I have to
Mm-hmm.
see God's blessings in my life. I have to celebrate with you. And then finally, I also have to talk about bad things. If I'm, hey, God is so good and nothing's, and my marriage is great and life is great, eventually you can't relate because you're going to go through your own stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so,
Yeah.
maybe that's just a good quadrant for all of us to think about. When I talk to people at church or classmates or family members, when I'm around the table with friends, am I the person who talks and listens? Do I celebrate God's gift and make people laugh? And am I really transparent and vulnerable so they can pray for the real me? And I think if we can check all four of those boxes, it's kind of like the tide that raises all the relational ships.
Yeah.
So I think about that kind of matrix for a good conversation quite a bit.
Well, I think you said something, and I think people wrestle with this topic, the real me. So,
Mhm.
very few people are willing to be vulnerable enough. And like you said, there can be too much of that. There can
Mhm.
be not enough of that. I mean, the perfect balance would be, yeah, perfect.
Mhm.
But I think people wrestle with being honest with who they really are, even with themselves.
Mhm.
And so, how do you encourage people in the book to get honest with why you're lonely and what the solution to that is? Because if you've got a problem, you got to be able to say, okay, I got this problem,
Mhm.
and over here, I'm going to choose this solution. How important is that kind of plan of solving the issue?
Oh, uh, it is so massively important. I've been leading small groups at my church for about a decade now, and it is, I don't know if I should say it's miraculous, but it's close to a miracle how on the first night of group, we can take people who are almost total strangers and bond them like that.
Yeah.
And I've come up with a recipe, and the recipe is to tell people, I want to know the real you. If you're going to spend the next like 12 Monday nights in my living room, I I don't want some like filtered representative version. Like, I want to pray for the real you. I want to get to know the real you, even if it's messy. I want to bear the burdens, forgive, walk beside the real you. And then I try to model that, and I get as absolutely transparent as I can.
Yeah.
And Beth, what I've seen is that if I throw out that boomerang, it comes right back to me every time.
Hmm.
That people open up about their struggles. They say, "Yeah, I'm in that same boat." And then by the time we're eating tortilla chips and salsa afterwards, like, people have escaped loneliness in a really profound way. And
Yeah.
many of them have found in one night what they hadn't experienced in a decade at their last church.
Mm.
So
I
it's
think that's
it's scary. It's not easy, but man, it's so valuable.
And it's so true. And I think one of the things that trips people up, and you're a pastor, you know this, I'm sure to be true, is people are, I'm just not ready to go there.
Mm.
Maybe there's something in their past, maybe there's some grief or something, but it doesn't take a whole life story. Like I can tell you, my dad was married 9 times. You don't really need to know a lot, which is true,
Mm.
but I don't have to tell you a lot more about my family than that because you're going to get a pretty good glimpse of what my life was like growing up. I don't have to dig into the weeds and tell you what all that was.
Yeah.
But I think people get hung up on sharing their whole story and thinking they've got to give their whole testimony when in pieces it's probably better. What do you think about that?
Yeah, that's really good. Oh man. Thank you. I'm going to actually think about that a lot because I think you're right. I think we can test the waters with kind of the big picture.
Mhm.
Like, to be honest with you guys, me and my wife aren't in the best spot right now.
Yeah.
We don't have to say we fought last night about the budget and like we can kind of put that out there and see to make sure this is a safe environment. Will
Mhm.
people be trustworthy with that kind of information? Will they respond with compassion and the grace of Jesus? So yeah, you could probably say things like, to be honest with you, I struggle with self-control when I'm on my smartphone.
Mhm.
We can kind of say broad, general things like that and read the room. And then I think it's going to be pretty evident pretty quick. Like, okay, these are good people that actually do want to love me and help me.
Mhm.
And yeah, I don't have to get held up by every embarrassing detail of the story that's maybe going to hold me back from making that confession.
Yeah. I do think people think they've got to prepare the whole thing, and
Mm.
I think if natural conversation takes place, then those things can come up, in as long as it's an authentic
Yeah.
setting. So let's talk about the 6 things you can do to be lonely less, because I know you've got some good ones here. So
Mm.
what do you tell people? Okay, I'm lonely. What's the first thing they can do to be able to say, I'm taking charge of this? I'm not going to be lonely anymore.
Yeah. Um, yeah, in every area of life, I try to give just one thing. I don't overwhelm people with like, here's a list of 82 things you should do
Right.
differently. um, so let's pick an area like friendship, for example. In the book, I call it fight for face-to-face friendship.
Yes.
Here's what I've seen. I got a lot of good people around me in my life, but if I don't fight to like be across the table at the coffee shop with them or in their living room or doing dinner together, it just doesn't happen.
Hmm.
I think the flow of culture is to make me busy, is for me to overcommit, is for me, if I finally make time, I got my phone out on the table and it's dinging and beeping and ringing and we're like, don't have each other's full attention. So here's what I think is a simple step, like schedule friend time in your calendar and leave your phone in the car. Like, don't wait to see, like, yeah, let's get together sometime. Like, nope, pull out your calendar, reserve that time, fight to protect it. And then once you finally get together, don't let the digital world and the 99 friends who aren't in the room distract you for some really deep, enriching time with the one person who is.
Yeah. That's so good because, we think, well, I'll just text them. Or, if I'm going to really be bold, I'll call them. But that face to face time is so important. So,
Mhm.
how much of this, and I want to hear, a couple more. How much of this is just discipline? Because to me, I could let my phone just, blah, 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 and
Mm.
but I can also not do that. So how much of it is just discipline and maturity that I know what counts and I'm going to choose that?
I think so. I'm a distance runner.
Yeah.
So sometimes my wife and I'll go out for a 5 mile or an 8 mile or a 10 mile run. And sometimes if we get to the end of our driveway and we have to decide, are we going to turn right or left? If it's a really windy day, let's say 20-mile-an-hour winds,
And
it's
let's just remind people you're coming from Wisconsin. It's probably cold.
it's probably very cold. Picture us like little Eskimos trying
Yes,
to shovel down.
Eskimos.
Yeah, it is so tempting to turn so the wind is at our back, to
Yeah.
do the easy thing now because it's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But we have this phrase in our marriage and in our home. It's called into the wind,
Mm,
which means in life, there's always going to be a hard thing to do. Let's just do it right away.
mhm,
Because once we run into that wind, there's going to come a time where we turn around and now the wind is at our back.
mhm.
So I think you're right. What I'm proposing in this book isn't like, here's some simple, just 2 steps, set it and forget it. It's going to be great. You're
Yeah.
probably going to have to go into the wind and you're going
Yeah.
to have to fight to protect your schedule, or you're going to have to share something transparent with Christians at your church. You're going to have to show up on a Sunday instead of live streaming, or apologize for something you said to your spouse or to your brother.
Hmm.
These are going to be difficult moments for you, but I have a hunch, if Ephesians 4 says, let's make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit.
Hmm.
That if we have that discipline and effort, we can't control everyone's reaction, but I have a hunch it's going to be a lot better than it was before.
And though I haven't read the book, I would like to just say to anyone who may listen is that you're not your typical pastor guy. I mean, you talk about tough stuff. And I think that's very important that you're willing to be vulnerable and bring up the tough topics, because I think people need that surface level is the same. And if
Mhm.
you just get a little deeper, then that just opens up things. So I think that it just bears witness to the fact that you are different, and you approach things front and center, and I think that will make the book very different. But I do want to talk about church.
Mm.
Um, you're a pastor of a
Yes.
church, and there's a lot of people aren't that are leaving the church.
Mm.
Older people, younger people. I know your church is in a growth mode, but what do you say to people that are going to church looking for that quick fix answer,
Mm.
and they're leaving thinking, well, that wasn't it?
Mm. Yeah, I'd say two things. Number one, I think we are not in the Garden of Eden. So
Right.
none of our churches are in paradise. So if I walk into church thinking, oh, these Jesus loving people are going to love me perfectly, that's like walking into marriage thinking you're going to complete me and this will be happily
Yeah.
ever after. Like you're setting yourself up for some deep disappointment. So let's be honest, these are people just like you. Even on Sundays, they're going to have kind, hospitable, wonderful days and some pretty selfish, self-centered, don't even know you're in the room kind of days. So
Hmm.
I say that first. Second, I would say there are some things that you can do that greatly increase your chances of having an awesome church experience. Number one, show up. So I love live streams. I love podcasting sermons. I love worship music on YouTube. But if that replaces my like in-person church life, it's going to have a negative relational effect. Number two, can I vent for a second, Beth?
Yes.
Uh, we have like potluck meals sometimes at our church, or we'll have a church service, and a person will sit at the first table, and then the next person that comes in sits at an empty table, and the third person who comes in sits at another empty table. And I think the reason we had this is for you to sit next to each other. But I don't know, it's hard to go into the wind
Yeah.
and just to go up to someone and say, hey, do you mind if I sit next to you? And what do you know? God starts a
Yeah.
conversation and it almost always turns out great. So
Yeah.
I think we have to do those little things like sit
Yeah.
next to someone, introduce yourself,
Yeah.
share a bit
Yeah.
about yourself. And like, I think those dominoes lead to great places. But wow, a majority of people honestly don't take them. They sit down quietly, they look at their church bulletin, maybe they pull out their phone, the service starts, and they hear the sermon, but there's really no relational connection.
But do you think that's because they're uncomfortable or they're insecure?
Hmm. It, I go around it, so I just do laps around my church for
Yeah.
like the 15 minutes before it starts.
Uh,
And I'll say, "Hey, Joe, have you met Rachel before?"
mm-hmm.
And boom, that's all they need. And then I just walk away and they're
Yeah.
talking and they're laughing.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. Maybe are we out of practice because when we're in the grocery store in line, we're on our phones and we don't
It's
just
true.
chit chat with strangers. And so I don't know, maybe we're just out of the habit of how do you start a real conversation. So you just
Yeah.
need a little nudge to say it's okay. They're not
I
going to
think
bite your head off. They're going to probably love you really well.
I think that's so true. I do think people hide behind phones. It's just a great escape. How much of this loneliness do you attribute to the technology? Because I mean, you got 20,000, 200,000 friends, followers, but yet you still feel lonely. Part of that is just misunderstanding what that means, right? Because just because you have friends on Facebook doesn't give you FaceTime with anyone.
Yeah. I think it's a massive explanation for the epidemic that the Surgeon General talked about.
Yeah.
to me, it makes I've seen it in my own life. If I look at my screen time, I have plenty of time to have great relationships.
Yeah.
If my device isn't lying to me, I could have the best marriage and be the best dad and be the best pastor, but it's so easy. I mean, they're masterfully engineered to keep our attention. And
They
so
are.
it obviously people struggled with loneliness in the Bible and there were no smartphones. So that's not the whole story, but I really think it explains the spike that we've seen in recent years.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so what's the next thing? The first thing is fight for your FaceTime with people. What's another couple of things that you can tell people, try this, this could work?
Yeah. At work, and I think this applies to school, give the really rare gift of your undivided attention.
Yes.
I go to staff meetings now, and it depresses me. Everyone has their laptop out. When I look over, people are multitasking between listening to the person who's talking and checking emails for the 17th time in the last hour.
Yeah.
We take a break in the meeting. Everyone reaches for their phones.
Mhm.
And we're literally in the same room, but we have no one's undivided attention.
Mhm.
And man, that's a cultural thing that really bums me out. And
Yeah.
and
Me
I get
too.
it. I get it because when I have my laptop there,
Yeah.
man, sometimes when someone's droning on and you're bored, your brain wants that hit of, I wonder if I have a new email.
Right.
And so I have to just bring a pad of paper and a pen and just get through those rough, boring, monotonous moments so I don't get sucked into having my attention divided into 17 different directions.
Mhm. That's so well said because it is. It's become culturally acceptable to not honor the person who's leading the meeting, the
Mm.
preacher who's preaching the sermon,
Mm.
and as speakers, we know how awful it is to look out and see everybody looking at their phones. It's like, oh my gosh, what
Yeah.
happened?
Yes.
But so, one of the questions I ask people when I coach, one of the first questions I start off with on a scale of 1 to 10, how effective are you at communicating? And the most I ever get is 4 or 5. But
Mm.
everybody, when I say, okay, I want to be a 10, what is your goal? They say a 10. Communication is the missing link here. Open, real communication. Why
Yeah.
is that so hard to be honest with yourself and with others enough to have a conversation that could help you reach an intimate point with someone that's brings that relationship to a more comfortable, intimate understanding of one another?
Yeah. I think the last time we talked was about my book Taboo,
Yes, it
and that
was.
comes to mind because the devil is the father of lies, and I think
Hmm.
his most persuasive lie is, "Shh, don't say that. They're
Yeah.
going to judge you. The way they're going to look at you, they're going to talk behind your back. You should not say. Just pray about that. Don't admit that. God can help you with that behind the scenes, but don't say that publicly." Man, I think that is so persuasive. In my
Yeah.
experience, that is the opposite of true. But man, people have
Yeah.
helped me so much when I've been candid and
Yeah.
transparent with them. So many people have prayed and they've made their own confessions. But wow, in the moment, there's just this overwhelming heaviness like, this is going to be bad if I don't say this. And so, yeah, not to over spiritualize it, but I think there is some serious demonic influence to try to keep us quiet because those are really breakthrough moments for conversation and community.
Yeah, that's so well said because it is. I mean, you do hear that little voice. Well, not now. Don't say
Mhm.
that.
Mm.
I mean, I've been married 30 years, and sometimes it takes all I've got to tell my husband, okay, what you said really, I mean, it made me question this or that. But once I say it, man, I feel like, and he's so responsive. He's like, I'm so glad you told me that. I had no idea you felt that way.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, that issue is gone instead of festering or
Mhm.
causing trouble between us. It just takes a lot to be honest with
Yeah.
ourselves and others, but it starts there, doesn't it? Doesn't it start with that?
It absolutely does. Yeah, I studied like what makes a great friendship a few years ago. This wasn't a Christian thing. It was just a secular sociologist, and they were saying the number one thing is that moment when you actually say something transparent, and the person almost always, instead of saying "ew, you're disgusting," they say "me too,"
Yeah.
and like you just get to you go from acquaintance to friend through that power of honest confession. So
Yeah.
I think that's it for sure.
Yeah. And that takes guts, and we've got to choose to have the guts. So give me one more lonely less solution.
Yeah. I've saved the most important for last.
All right.
The hardest thing in the world, but it's the biggest blessing, is to repent and believe the gospel. Jesus said, if you want to be my disciple and follow me, you have to die. So your truth has to die, your autonomy has to die, you getting the last word has to die. But if you deny yourself and take up your cross and follow me, I love the end of that offer. Follow me. So, what's the best answer to loneliness? It's the presence of a perfect, loving, patient, gentle, powerful, glorious, and good God. So, don't know if all your
That's
listeners are Christian, but feels like, oh my goodness, I don't want to repent of my sin. I'm going to lose something. But no, Jesus says it's like a treasure hidden in a field. And
mm-hmm.
if you could find God, who has said, even if you go through the valley, do not be afraid, because I will be with you.
Yeah.
I will be present. So it's going to feel like death to have to crucify that part of you that wants to get the last word, but it actually leads to incredible life with God forever.
And sometimes even Christians go through periods where they feel like God is silent and God is missing.
Hmm.
And it's important, I have those times, but I think again it's important for me to say, God, what are you doing and where are you? I have to be honest even with God. And I think that a lot of Christians get really scared by, because they're like, oh, I don't want to dishonor God. Well, I mean, he's our father.
Hmm.
So do you think that's the gut level honesty starts with God and saying, Lord, help me with these thoughts?
Yes. This is why I love the Psalms.
Yeah.
Often when I'm ministering to someone who's in a really rough spot, I open up to Psalm 13, where the psalmist says, how long, God? Like, how
Yeah.
long do I have to rest? How long do I have to do? Why aren't you answering me? Like, now. I need you. I needed you yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a short, sweet little psalm. But the psalmist says, but I trust in your unfailing love, and I will sing to the Lord, for he has been good to me.
Yeah.
So just like we say, we should be honest with each other. I love how the Psalms model that, just raw. There's plenty of faith there, but wow, there's a good level of honesty, and it's so good for our relationship with God.
And I think, and we'll close on this because I think this is so important. And I'm sure as a pastor, this. I think there's two things that work against us. And that is a sense of purpose. What am I here for, God?
Mm,
And a sense of identity, because, ultimately we're strong in who we are if we can scroll social media all day and not feel like a loser,
mm,
because we know who we are.
mm,
But the two things that I think people struggle with the most is, what do I do and who am I?
mm.
So what do you say to those as a pastor? Because those are big life-changing questions.
Yeah. In Jesus, you are a redeemed, perfect child of the Most High God.
Hmm.
Now you could be
Amen.
the best influencer on the internet, but that would be nothing compared to having the Father who runs the universe look at you and smile. So when our deepest identity is in that, it's not something, this book is called 6 Steps to a Less Lonely Life. Thank God there aren't 6 steps to earning the Father's love.
Right.
It's just
Thank
a
you,
gift that's
Lord.
ours in Jesus. And
Yeah.
so to have a rock solid identity as a child of God by grace and through faith means everything.
Yeah.
And then the
It
purpose
does.
that you don't need to be a 6-figure salary earner. You don't have to have 100,000 followers on whatever platform. Like, just making your neighbor a little less lonely.
Yeah.
Just reaching over to that person who's sitting alone at church because they don't have the courage to sit next to you, and being hospitable. Just being the one in the room to confess your sins first to make it safe. You don't have to travel to the other side of the world to be a missionary. Just take those little but difficult steps that are going to help people connect. And what a great purpose every time you step into any room.
Yeah. That's very good, because I think we have to stand firm in who we are, which results in what we do, because then we wrestle less with God, because we know he's going to lead us
Mm.
and we trust that he's going to lead us. So our lonely less starts with realizing he's with us.
Mm-hmm.
And even when we don't feel that he is. And I think that's very well said. So we talked about 3 of the principles of lonely less. You're going to have to get the book to get the other 3 because we don't have time to talk about all of them today. But Mike has got timeofgrace.org. They have radio, TV, blogs, vlogs. I mean, just a resourceful ministry of all kinds of things. If you've got a tough topic and you don't know how to deal with it, they have it on timeofgrace.org. He is not afraid to face the tough topics. But giving lonely less for Christmas is a great idea, right?
Yes, I like that idea a lot.
I mean, it's really true, because if you want people that are feeling lonely to have a plan, you can't just sit home. You've got to be able to say, okay, what am I going to do different? And you have 6 steps to do different.
Absolutely. Yeah, Christmas is the season of Emmanuel, God with us, the
Yes.
ultimate answer to loneliness. And I think as
Yes.
we live out his image, we can be with other people and help ourselves and them with their loneliness too.
Amen to that. Well, Mike, I wish you great success with the book and all of your other books. Thank you for joining us again. I hope we'll get to do this again, because I always like talking to you. You always have such good topics and insights. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Beth.
Okay. Have a great day, everybody.